Hey, beautiful human. I have had this feeling push to share this particular model I'm going to share in this video for a really long time, and the push doesn't go away, and for some reason I've felt really nervous about sharing it. But what I notice is that the push to do it and share it hasn't gone away, so I'm just going to do it, and I may be a little nervous while I do it. So if you would like to come along with me, what I'm going to be speaking about is the role that the nervous system plays in our capacity to access our essential self, or you may speak that in terms, you might use the word being, or you might use the word soul. So I did a little chart before, but I'm going to try and simplify all of this right down. So I'm going to go long picture first, and then I'm going to go into a bit more detail. So basically, if we start with, so when I talk about soul or essential self, what I'm speaking about is the part of you that doesn't die when the body dies. It's the aspect of you that you may experience as a sense of timelessness. You may sense as a quality of presence that's very, very deep. It may be a feeling you have when you feel most yourself. Maybe you experience it when you're in an activity that you absolutely love and you get lost in it. These kind of places can often be where we experience our natural self, our true self. So if you're like most people who aren't enlightened, you would likely spend quite a bit of your time not in that state. So why is that, and how is the nervous system involved in that? So basically, the way that we frame it, if we look at ego development or personality development, we would say that when you come into the world, you're probably most closest and most innocently in contact with your essential self. There is much less, if not no, ego structure, no sense of individual I. In fact, it takes a developmental process to start externalizing mum, externalizing the caregivers, to start experiencing the self as a thing. Before that, we don't experience ourselves as a thing, we just experience ourselves as essentially in the soup of life. So what happens is that as we develop our ego sense of self in response to the way the world is with us, in response to our feelings and experiences in early life, we start to, the way that I frame it, is we start to develop a kind of callousing around the essential self. So a kind of hardening that stops us from accessing, or hardening or numbing or dulling or incredible pain that sits between our conscious awareness and our access to this essential self state. And so that callousing that develops is essentially created by moments where we weren't seen by our caregivers, or moments where we felt unsafe. And this is going right back to baby bodies and little toddler bodies. Moments where what we needed as a new being in a body on the earth wasn't met. Our safety, our nourishment, our contact, our sense that someone is really seeing and loving and there with us. So all of the ways that happens, even through good parenting, good enough parenting, all of the ways that happens forms places of pain that essentially we don't want to go to. So what happens is that rather than meeting the pain of that fear or that grief or whatever it is in that calloused place, we tend to move away from the grief, move away from the pain, and go deeper into identifying with our identity, go deeper into the world of form, deeper into basically strategies to try to get our essential self, when actually our essential self never goes anywhere. We just have this callousing between our conscious awareness and our experience that seems to keep us out of our essential self. So, all of this is to say that movement away from our pain. So if we say essential self is in the center of a circle, and if my fingers, so the essential self is the gap in the middle of the circle, and my fingers are the development of an ego identity, we are moving away from that circle. I should have found something to put my phone in. We're moving away from that identity. So this is our ego self. We're moving away from that identity and away from essential self, trying to avoid the pain of separation, trying to avoid the grief, the anger, whatever is in there, and trying to fill the apparent lack. Because when we are not in the center here, we experience ourselves as lacking. And we believe that we don't have ourselves. So this is where a lot of strategies come in to try to fill that lack. So all of those behaviors that move away from the essential self and move away from the pain, we would say that they are habituated and they are programmed into our automatic nervous system responses. So I'll give you a specific example of that so that it's not just a concept. So say that, okay, so here we are, we have your essential self in the center, and then we have your identity creating that circle. Let's say that part of what formed your identity was an angry, maybe violent mother. And let's say that your experience in having this angry mother in your field as you grew up created a kind of collapse and a kind of grief in you, kind of a sense of unbelieving that life could be so hard, let's say. So the strategy in this case might be, because your physiology might be practiced in collapsing in the face of anger and intensity, the strategy might be, there's a whole lot of different ways we can strategize to get ourselves away from that. You might become very overcompensating, so you might decide to go train in Aikido or karate or something to make yourself really big and strong, and you might go and confront anger. Or you might decide to retreat very much into yourself and not give yourself to anybody, and decide that it's safer to stay disconnected rather than risk being close to that kind of anger again. So all of these are strategies to avoid the feelings that are held in your early composition of your personality structure. So, and as I said, it's held, those responses are held in the nervous system. So if we can learn how to have a conversation and a dialogue with your nervous system and start to learn the language of the nervous system, we can essentially start to create a curiosity and a witnessing of this ego structure. And as soon as we bring in the qualities of curiosity and witnessing, we are no longer identified with that picture. We're now somewhere in more of a witness perspective, and that's where you have power, and you start to have power and choice. So rather than those strategies to deny your need for connection and cut everybody off or become very aggressive yourself, when we turn towards those nervous system responses, we start to meet the wound. I'm trying to keep a circle here. We start to meet the wound in the ego identity, and we start to, your experience might be starting to melt into that very felt sense experience of the wound of that, how that anger actually impacted you. I'm going to try and wrap up soon so this isn't too long. And what happens when we turn, rather than running away from the callousing in the ego structure, we start to, when we get curious about it, these layers start to soften, and the essential self can start to come up and meet you. So how this will look in practice is maybe you're sharing about your angry mum. You're sharing about the way your body actually just wants to collapse completely. And when you collapse, so we're having this conversation with your body, and when you collapse completely, suddenly this great wave of grief happens. And if you don't move away into, well, I don't want people anyway, or we'll fuck them all, if you don't move away into those strategies or movements, and you just stay with the grief, what will happen is there'll be a very natural response that rises in your being. So your essential self or your being will tend to respond to this with any kind of essential state that's relevant for you. So it might be compassion, it might be strength, it might be peace. Whatever arises in you as you meet this deep wound is going to be very, very specific to what you need and very specific to you. So I never say that you're going to have a particular thing coming up if you meet a particular emotion, because it's different for everybody. But the point here is that if we don't have the ability to work with the nervous system and those in the cells programmed responses, if we're just meeting this through cognitively talking about the story of a childhood, or just through emoting and getting angry and hitting pillows, if we're not meeting the patterned behaviors in the body and then allowing the emotion and energy in that memory to discharge, in my experience, the patterns don't shift. We just stay looping, because essentially we've just met it in the cognition and in the limbic brain, and we haven't addressed, I'm pointing to the three different parts of the brain, we haven't addressed the nervous system, animal reptilian part of the brain that is holding all of the automatic behaviors that you have around this particular content. So in my experience, when we work with the nervous system and we have this awareness, the awareness that I want to offer you, that your essential self is actually capable of healing everything that you're holding. And the ego self, so if you remember, we've got essential self in the middle, and then we've got the ego self kind of calloused around it. The ego self will tell you that you need to do something, and you need to be something, and you need to somehow change, or you need to do in order to be. And it's not like that. It's actually that the more we be with our structure, the more we meet the patterned responses, the more they can steam off, and they can lose their charge, which translates into no longer having you do those habitual responses, no longer needing to do what you did as a child in order to respond to angry people. So now, say you've met the collapse in the face of mum's anger, and you've had a response of authentic strength. Now, what you will find is when you move into situations where there's an angry woman, there's the potential to speak now, because your nervous system isn't holding that old resistance to the collapse. Maybe there's more access to fight response for you. Maybe there's the capacity to just go, fuck this, I'm not here for this, and walk out. And maybe there's the capacity to socially relate and say, hey, I'm not feeling very safe when you do that. Could you tone that down? So more options open up. I'm really proud of myself that I did this in under 15 minutes because I tried to do it before and it took like way too long. Anyway, this is something I've been wanting to share for a long time, and I'm not sure why it's been so important for me to share, and I'm not sure who will watch this because it's quite a long video. But I'd love to hear how this lands, and especially if that made sense with me trying to do the diagram with my fingers. yeah, I'd love to hear how this lands and your thoughts and your experience around this kind of thing. All right, lots of love.